And you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. Qatari Foreign Ministry spokesperson Majid Al-Ansari has confirmed that Gaza ceasefire talks are ongoing in Doha between Israel and Hamas, and it remains in their first phase as mediators intensify efforts to reach a framework agreement. Israeli airstrikes on Lebanon's Bekaa Valley has killed 12 people, marking another escalation amid cross-border tensions. According to Lebanese state media, the strikes targeted eastern Lebanon. Ukrainian drone attacks overnight has wounded 18 people and damaged residential and commercial buildings in Russia's Voronezh, Lipetsk, and the Bryansk regions. With 16 injuries reported in Voronezh alone, Russian defenses intercepted 55 Ukrainian drones across 5 regions, including 12 destroyed over Voronezh, as reported by Governor Alexander Gusev. The United Nations has stated that any peace talks on Russia's war in Ukraine must include full accountability for its war crimes and human rights violations. The UN's call comes amid a sharp rise in recent civilian deaths. The Kremlin has warned that the US president's promise of more US weapons for Ukraine and his 50-day deadline for a peace deal could encourage Kyiv to continue fighting and stall negotiations. Meanwhile, NATO members like Denmark and the Netherlands explore joining US-led initiative to arm Ukraine. Britain launched a secret relocation scheme for around 20,000 Afghans after a soldier accidentally leaked the personal details of over 33,000 individuals, exposing them to Taliban retaliation, according to local court documents revealed and reported by media outlets. NASA veteran Peggy Whitson completed her 5th space flight, returning safely to Earth with astronauts from India, Poland, and Hungary after their country's first missions to the International Space Station. According to Reuters, this flight marked SpaceX's 18th human crewed flight. Gunman has killed 27 people and wounded several others in a Monday evening attack on Jebu Rahos in north-central of Nigeria, according to media reports. Local sources, including resident Chuwong David, has confirmed. Meanwhile, Nigeria's former President Muhammadu Buhari is set to be buried today in his hometown amid heightened tensions. Israeli airstrikes have killed at least 12 people in Lebanon's Bekaa Valley, according to Lebanese state media. The attacks targeted the Wadi Farah area in eastern Lebanon, including a camp for displaced Syrians. Among the dead are 7 Syrians with 8 others injured. Lebanon's national news agency described the strikes as raids by enemy warplanes. The Israeli army confirmed it carried out strikes on what it called Hezbollah targets in the region, but did not address the civilian casualties directly. The Bekaa Valley has been a flashpoint in recent weeks as tensions continue to rise along the Israel-Lebanon border. The strikes come amid escalating cross-border violence, raising fears of a broader regional confrontation involving Syria, Hezbollah, and Israel. Now we are joined by Ali M. Abushbak. He's an independent Palestinian researcher joining us from Cairo. Thank you, Ali, for joining us today. Good to see you. What is the strategic significance of this location, the Bekaa Valley, for Hezbollah and Israel, and why has it become a focal point in this current escalation?
Thank you, Osma, for having me. By the way, this is not the first violation from Israel's about the ceasefire between Lebanon and Israel that has been in December 2024. There is 100 of violation from the Israeli side, and they are counting it. Unfortunately, today it was an airstrike from Israel at this area, especially. In my opinion, Hezbollah has moved from southern part of Syria because of that area. It's under Israelis control, and it's highly active from the Israelis agency at that area. And we have witnessed the major accident that happened during the confrontation between Hezbollah and Israel. So maybe the Hezbollah has a new tactic to change its sites and change its places to the East Lebanon, and we have witnessed this area has been targeted many times. In my opinion, as well as Hezbollah has no other choice, because as I mentioned that southern part of Lebanon, it's under Israeli control, and there is a border still issue because there is some Israelis point at that border area in between Israel and Lebanon. So the things is killing a command, and Israel claims that the target or assassination it was for the commander of Hezbollah, and we have witnessed several of Israeli aides to the affiliation or about the membership of Hezbollah. Despite Hezbollah announced the ceasefire between Lebanon and Israel, and they are respecting it. So the thing is now also that Israel conducted an airstrike in Syria. That's in the back of the doors section in Syria, and there is a confrontation between the regime and between some militant group in Syria and this minority sector. So the thing is now in the region between, I mean, in the area Syria, Lebanon, Gaza, it's a bit complicated. While Israel also trying to push the Palestinian who's in northern part in Gaza to move to southern part in Gaza in the concentration zone. So the things is more complicated. In my opinion, this about the Syrian Israel's also conflict. I guess it will not going to impact the negotiation for a peace process between the new regime, Syria, and between Israel. Well, it's going forward, and I guess there is a process in this side. So with the Lebanon, I guess the Hezbollah accepted the notion to demilitarize, especially after giving the Lebanon government the decision about what they should decide about the future, the future of the conflict between Israel and Lebanon. So, according to American President Donald Trump, there is a comprehensive peace deal between Arab area and Israel, and I guess this is one of the steps to pressurize all the actors to accept the deal and recognize or normalize the relation with Israel.
And Ali, how are Lebanese state institutions and the public responding to continued Israeli air raids, especially in regions far from the immediate border like the eastern Lebanon?
I guess all the Lebanese shocked, and especially it's not a new things, Osama. This is during the war between Hezbollah and Israel. So Israel has been targeting several of areas. This is not a new accident that happened to them. So they are dealing with it as a normal. Today I was talking to one Lebanon friend, and he said that people are optimistic about the peace in this area, and they are hoping there is some deal that is coming very soon. I guess the people nowadays, they are waiting for the declaration of peace, and we are all hope these things.
And how does Lebanon see it as, are they not trying to, or is there any Lebanese army that is trying to counterattack these Israeli airstrikes that are continuing in their own land?
Usuma, I mean, in Lebanon's situation is a bit complicated. While Israel argue that the Lebanon army is a weak, it's not able, it doesn't have ability to control the sites and the area that Hezbollah used to take it for and based on it. So the things is, I guess nowadays, and there is some restriction between Hezbollah and the Lebanon's army. This is on one side. On other hand, that what are you talking? Lebanon's army, it's completely mutual between the Hezbollah and Israel conflict, and it's not a part of the conflict. Especially, it's representing the vision of the government in Lebanon, which the conflict between Hezbollah, especially as a militant group in Syria and Israel. While I guess the government, Lebanon's government, it's taking the politician struggle against the Israelis airstrike, or politician face to counter the Israelis violation. They are doesn't accept the violence as a resistance, so they are taking the politician and diplomatic ways to solve the issue between Lebanon and Israel. At the same time, Hezbollah doesn't believe in this strategy as a significant strategy to resolve to resolve the conflict between Lebanon and Israel. Hezbollah considered Israel as an occupation and should be resist that based or backed from the Iranian regime after the revolution in 1979.
Thank you very much, Ali M. Abushbak, for joining us and sharing your insight as a Middle East affairs expert. Now we move on to our next news. A rights monitor says Syrian government forces killed 12 Druze civilians in a brutal raid in the city of Suwaida today. According to the Syrian Observatory, 4 human rights troops from the Defense and Interior Ministries stormed a guest house belonging to the Radwan family and carried out field executions. Unverified video circulating online shows bloodied bodies in civilian clothing lying inside the room. Furniture was shattered and photos of Druze dignitaries were scattered on the floor. The incident comes amid ongoing fighting between Druze factions and Syrian government troops in the southern region. Rights groups are calling for an independent investigation as tensions in Suwaida continue to escalate. The government has not yet commented on the allegations. Now we're joined by Professor Veselin Popovsky. He's a professor at Vice Dean at Jindal Global Law School, joining us live from Bulgaria. Thank you, Professor, for joining us today. Good to see you. What is this historical and political context of the relationship between Druze community and Syrian government and now with Israel?
Yes, we see unfortunately some escalating conflict on the border of Israel and Syria. Unfortunately, that also invoked quite a lot of civilian casualties. We still need to investigate, as you correctly point out. It's a very fresh news. But historically, yes, it was not an easy relationship. Syria is a very mixed territory with various people living there. And not all of them, by the way, are Muslims. There are a lot of also Christians. There are other religious groups. And historically, those tensions were very much political inside Syria. By the way, the same applied to Lebanon as well. Lebanon is another mix of various religions, ethnicities. And generally because this part of the world has been colonized for a long time by the British and French, and because the late governments were often authoritarian and dictatorial, not much respect has been paid to the rights of the minorities, to respect of religious freedoms, and for that matter, the conflicts in Syria and in Lebanon continue to present some potential danger. These are not high-intensity conflicts. They are low-intensity conflicts, but from time to time, we have seen in the past, and possibly we can see in the future, very similar tensions arising, escalating, as you said, to casualties. And in my opinion, Israel should not exploit that and should possibly restrain itself to self-defensive operations rather than to have incursion into territories across the border, because that doesn't really bring much of a solution and peace. It can magnify possible tensions in the future.
Yes, indeed. And building on that, now looking at Syrian government's role here, what role do the Syrian Interior and Defense Ministries and the government play in these domestic military operations, as well as what is their reported involvement in these raids?
Well, that's a good question, because Syrian government is also a recent undertaking. As we know, Syria has been ruled by Assad family for a very long time, Hafez Assad and then Bashar al-Assad. So the government is trying to pacify, and in fact they declared that they are happy to negotiate, they are happy to talk to various groups in Syria somehow to ensure that the conflict doesn't escalate. Generally, the international community is, I would say, sympathetic to the efforts of the Syrian government to have stability and security. Again, although the government came to power with replacing with military force Bashar al-Assad, generally over time, with some exceptions. Again, there were some retaliatory attacks by the Syrian government in the places where Alawite used to live that obviously need to be condemned, some human rights violations. But generally in this situation, if we talk about the incursion of Israel into the territory of controlled by the Druze, I think the Syrian government is attempting to be constructive and to reduce tension and to reduce violence.
Thank you very much for sharing that insight, Professor. Please stay with us as we stay on this topic in the region. In China's Tianjin, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has said that Moscow and Tehran remain committed to a diplomatic solution on Iran's nuclear issue. Speaking after an SCO meeting, Lavrov said he and Iranian counterpart Abbas Araghchi discussed peaceful political approaches. He stressed Iran has repeatedly denied building nuclear weapons and no evidence has proven otherwise. Lavrov defended Iran's right to enrich uranium for energy under global treaties. Talks on technical steps will continue. The meeting comes weeks after a brief military escalation involving Israel, Iran, and the US, which ended in a ceasefire brokered by President Donald Trump. Now we go back to our guest discussion with Professor Veselin Popovsky. He's joining us from Bulgaria. Thank you, Professor, for staying with us. Now, how has Russia historically positioned itself in negotiations related to Iran's nuclear program?
Yes, these are already 20 plus years old negotiations. Russia is one of the permanent members of the Security Council. And in fact, those negotiations with Iran involve all 5 permanent members of the Security Council, not only Russia, but also United States, Britain, France, and China, plus Germany. Germany somehow also is part of this group of 6 countries that negotiate with Iran the control over facilities. Basically, what Iran was trying to say is that we need nuclear energy for civilian use. But then questions arises why they enrich uranium in so large numbers, going almost to 60% enriched uranium, which you don't need if the civilian use of uranium is enough to be enriched to 5%. Anything between 5 and 60% enrichment of uranium already signals potentially a development of nuclear weapons. And for that matter, the international community, Russia included, is concerned with that. And that's the history of the problem. The previous agreement, which back in the time of Barack Obama and Donald Trump, the first term, have made. Currently, I think Russia is trying to get the attention out of its own war in Ukraine. And this is why Lavrov is going to North Korea, to Iran. Russia is trying to play the peacemaker role in between United States, Israel, and Iran. Somehow, because they try to suggest they are still a constructive international partner, and in such a way to deviate the attention from its own aggression of Ukraine and killing many civilians in Ukraine. So that's the game of the diplomat, experienced one might say, like Sergei Lavrov. He's an experienced diplomat. And he's trying to present Russia as a peacemaker and potentially a controlling factor against the Iranian development of nuclear weapons.
And building on that answer, what are the key provisions of international treaties that allow Iran to actually enrich uranium for civilian energy purposes? And how do these apply to Lavrov's recent statements?
Well, the international law is very clear that there should be no proliferation of nuclear weapons, something that Iran definitely violates, and also North Korea violates. As I mentioned, the rule is any country can develop enriching uranium, but only for civilian use, only up to 5% enrichment and no more than that. Every country that cheats and hides and manipulates and doesn't offer its facility for inspections already raised doubts, and that's exactly what happened. Iran is not very transparent and not very compliant with the regime established by the International Atomic Energy Agency based in Vienna, which is the primary expert body to monitor, to inspect, and to verify that countries do not enrich uranium to the danger of level of military use. So for that matter, yes, Iran is in violation of international rules. And for Russia, this is, again, as I said, an attempt to engage in some sort of diplomacy. Well, anything that Putin and Lavrov try to talk even with anybody else in the world, they regard it as kind of a positive legitimation for their own existence, because otherwise they will be totally isolated as aggressors in Ukraine. So it's understandable why Russia is involved in that, but that should not distract the international community from Russian own violations of international, Russian own aggression against Ukraine. So hopefully, back to Iran, some constraints can be imposed on the Iranian regime to comply with the non-proliferation regime. And there is an agreement on that. In fact, even Russia and China officially continue to say that Iran should not develop nuclear weapons, although we don't know what Russia does behind the officiality of that. there are suspicions that in fact Russia is the country that supplies Iran and North Korea with a lot of technology and know-how in terms of developing nuclear weapons. Again, we don't know, it's just a guess, just a speculation, but we need to see what happens next as to make such evaluation and judgment.
Thank you very much, Professor Veselin Popovsky, for joining us and sharing your insight as a professor from Jindal Global Law School. Now we move on to our next news. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says he has no doubt Russia will handle new U.S. sanctions. Responding to President Donald Trump's 50-day Ukraine deadline, Lavrov said Moscow wants to understand what's driving the U.S. president. He blamed NATO and the EU for pressuring Trump and backing Ukraine. Lavrov also insisted Russia remains open to talks but blames Kyiv for its delays. Let's have a look at what the Russian foreign minister had to say.
Конечно же, как сказал Дмитрий Песков, мы хотим понять, что стоит за этим заявлением. 50 дней, было раньше и 24 часа было, и 100 дней было. Мы все это проходили и действительно хотим понять, чем движим президент Соединенных Штатов. Ясно, что он находится под огромным, я бы сказал, неприличным давлением Европейского Союза и нынешнего руководства НАТО, которые бесцеремонно поддерживают требования Зеленского продолжать накачивать его современным, в том числе наступательным оружием, за счет все большего и большего ущерба налогоплательщикам в западных странах. У нас все-таки так же беспрецедентное количество санкций против нас объявлено. Справляемся, я нисколько не сомневаюсь, что мы справимся. Этот вывод тоже основан на оценке, на анализе независимых, в том числе многих западных экономистов.
Now we're joined by Professor Oleksiy Haran. He's a professor of comparative politics, joining us live from Kyiv, Ukraine. Thank you, Professor, for joining us today. Welcome to NewsX World. Now, what are the practical implications of President Trump's 50-day deadline on Ukraine and Russia's war? Is this feasible according to you? Is it realistic according to you?
It depends on President Trump, what he is going to do, because definitely, the sanctions that were suggested, the sanctions are influencing Russian economy. Whatever Mr. Lavrov is saying, by the way, Mr. Lavrov is a criminal, so I don't know why we should have live quote for such a long time. What Lavrov is saying is typical, Russian propaganda defending aggression against sovereign state, which was neutral, which gave up nuclear weapons. Regarding sanctions, the present sanctions that are existing, they are influencing Russian economy, definitely, but they are not enough. So it's important to increase these sanctions. And Trump was saying about that. But unfortunately, this is a typical Trump manner, to say, I will continue to think for 2 weeks, then for more 2 weeks. Now he's talking about 50 days. Well, if Russia behaves like a country which doesn't want any peace agreements, and President Trump is serious regarding introduction of these sanctions and so-called secondary sanctions also as well, which will be against those countries who are importing Russian oil and gas. So this would be a real blow to Russian economy. However, we don't know, what President Trump will decide at the end. So far, what 50 days means. 50 days means that Russia will continue to kill peaceful civilian Ukrainians every day for 50 days. That's what they're going right now. There were calculations that during this time, these 50 days, Russia may send 25,000 drones against Ukraine. 25,000, imagine. So definitely we need to stop what Russia what Russia is doing. So we'll see what will happen with supply of defense weapons, which was announced by Trump, including anti-missile systems Patriots. The statement was, I would say, good. We'll see how quickly it will be realized. And the same is about sanctions. But I think, 50 days, we are waiting for, Trump actually is waiting for half a year already. So we'll see what will happen.
Yes. Professor, please stay with us as we stay on the region. Now we move on to our next news. Ukrainian Prime Minister Shmyhal has said that he submitted a resignation letter as part of the country's largest wartime governmental reshuffle expected this week. President Volodymyr Zelensky on July 14th has nominated First Deputy Prime Minister Yulia Sviridenko to replace Shmyhal. Sviridenko, who is also the economy minister, is reportedly a close and long-standing ally of Zelensky. Shmyhal, who has been in his post since March 2020, is expected to be appointed as Ukraine's new defense minister, according to Zelensky. Parliament is due to vote on Sviridenko's nomination later this week. Zelensky has also said that he had already discussed priority tasks for the next 6 months with her. According to reports, the key tasks would be to increase domestic weapons production and implement reforms to unlock Ukraine's economic potential. The shakeup, the biggest since Russia's invasion in February 2022, comes as the Russian forces continue their grinding advance in Ukraine's east, and prospects for any fast ceasefire deal look dim. Now we go back to our guest discussion with Professor Oleksiy Haran. He's a professor of comparative politics. Thank you, Professor, for staying with us. Now, for this shake-up, what's the reaction within Ukraine? Are people supportive of this or against this shake-up in the Ukrainian government?
Look, there's no surprise. Actually, the step, which includes appointment of new Prime Minister Yulia Sviridenko, is in the news for more than half a year. So this was very expected, nothing sensational. And most experts, they agree that yes, there would be some new approaches, there would be a new blood. Shmyhal spent 5 years in power, as you correctly mentioned. This is the longest time for the Ukrainian cabinet to stay in power. So definitely after 5 years, we do not have now regular elections because of the war. So we need some changes, and this will bring new blood. A lot of previous ministers will continue to perform their functions in the new government. We need to understand that in the present day situation, in especially martial law, what the cabinet is doing, the cabinet is performing the political course which is designed by president and his office. In this sense, we do not expect, huge changes.
Thank you very much for sharing that insight and sharing your insight throughout our news. Professor Oleksiy Haran, that was all the way from Kyiv, Ukraine. Now we move on to our next news. US President Donald Trump has called on the Federal Reserve to immediately cut interest rates, claiming consumer prices are low and Americans need economic relief now. He accused the Fed of moving too slowly in a series of statements. Trump also announced a new trade deal with Indonesia, describing it as a great deal for everybody, though no details have been released yet. On the other hand, Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum is warning of retaliatory steps if Mexico and the US fail to reach a trade agreement before August 1st deadline. Sheinbaum says Mexico will announce other measures if tariff talks with Washington break down. She has also criticized new U.S. duties on Mexican tomato imports, calling them unfair and damaging to farmers. She expects to unveil a new action plan with tomato producers and agricultural groups next week. Now, we are joined by Raymond Vickery. He's a former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Commerce, joining us live from Washington, D.C. Thank you, Raymond, for joining us today. Welcome to NewsX World. Thank you. What are the Federal Reserve's typical criteria and processes for adjusting interest rates? Is it being followed this time as well?
Well, thanks very much for having me. The Fed, of course, under U.S. law, is to perform an independent function, keeping in mind two things. One, keeping inflation low, and two, keeping employment high. So this is a balancing function which has been performed very well, particularly since World War II. Trump sees a different way of approaching the U.S. economy, and particularly the interest rate, and that is what is in it for him now. And he has continually pressed for a increase in lending by lowering the Fed rates and destroying the independence of the Federal Reserve. The latest inflation rates for the month of June show that his policy of tariffs is starting to bite in the United States, and the inflation rate is going up. Therefore, there needs to be an independent balancing performed by the Fed to keep inflation from going through the roof. Trump does not see it that way. His perspective is that of a real estate developer, and if he can get cheap loans in the hands of people, that that he will make money, and that it will be in his personal interest. This, of course, should not be the perspective of the United States president, who has obligations other than what's in it for him right now, but obligations to the welfare of the entire country, including those in the lower economic stratus of the United States. So this is a distressing development that Trump is keeping on, trying to destroy the independence of the Fed, and it will not redound well.
And Raymond, can you... Thank you very much, Raymond, for joining us today and sharing your insight as a former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Commerce. Now we move on to our next news. South Korea's defense ministry has summoned Japan's defense attaché today to protest an annual white paper published by Tokyo, which made a territorial claim over disputed islands located in the East Sea. Both sides claim long-standing territorial rights over the islands, which are known as Dokdo in Korean and Takeshima in Japanese, and they lie roughly halfway between the two countries. South Korea's defense ministry said in a statement that its international affairs chief Lee Kwang-sok had summoned the Japanese defense attaché to Korea in protest. Lee demanded the immediate removal of Japan's territorial claims from the paper and added that the government will sternly respond to any attempts to harm sovereignty over the Dokdo Islands. According to reports, Tokyo has claimed the islands as its own territory in its annual defense white paper for decades, prompting protests from Seoul. The islands are currently controlled by Seoul with a small contingent of coast guards.
정부는 일본 정부가 7월 15일 화요일 발표한 방위백서를 통해 역사적, 지리적, 국제법적으로 명백한 우리 고유의 영토인 독도에 대한 부당한 영유권 주장을 되풀이한 데 대해 강력히 항의하며 이를 즉각 철회할 것을 촉구합니다. 정부는 대한민국 고유의 영토인 독도에 대한 일본 정부의 어떠한 주장도 우리 주권에 하등의 영향도 미치지 못한다는 것을 재차 분명히 하며 독도에 대한 일본의 어떠한 도발에 대해서도 단호히 대응해 나갈 것을 밝힙니다.
South Korea's defense ministry has summoned Japan's defense attack today to protest an annual white paper published by Tokyo, which made a territorial claim over disputed islands located in the East Sea. Now, both sides claim long-standing territorial rights over the islands, which are known as Dokdo in Korean and Takeshima in Japanese. And they lie roughly halfway between the two countries. Now we go back to our guest discussion with Raymond Vickery. He's a former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Commerce. Thank you, Vickery. Thank you, Raymond, for staying with us. What role can the United States play here, given its security alliances with both South Korea and Japan, and this now rising geopolitical importance amid Taiwan and China tensions?
Well, thanks again for having me. It seems to me that the significance of the reiteration of this longstanding South Korea-Japan dispute shows the weakness in the Trump approach of America first. The creation of peace and prosperity internationally requires cooperation, particularly among great democracies like U.S.-India, U.S.-Japan, but it also requires that there be leadership to resolve matters other than through disputations and the use of force. The main winner here in a dispute between Japan and South Korea, of course, is China. China has its own territorial claims vis-a-vis Japan, vis-a-vis the Philippines, trying to take over territory, and of course the major flashpoint possibly with Taiwan. The real spinoff from the Russian invasion of Ukraine is a reigniting of the old doctrine that you can resolve territorial disputes by force. We, of course, hope that this would never happen between South Korea and Japan, but the United States has a very definite interest in seeing that the rule of law, that peaceful resolution of disputes takes place not only between adversaries like China and the U.S., but by allies such as South Korea and Japan. And you can't have that approach at the same time as you take America first and things which happen outside of our immediate interest are not of the concern of the United States. They are of the concern, and it requires an overall approach such as that embodied in the United Nations Charter to be able to keep peace in the world so that peace and prosperity can benefit the average man and woman wherever they may live.
Thank you very much, Raymond Vickery, for joining us again and sharing your insight as a former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Commerce, joined us live from Washington, D.C. Now we move on to our next news. In London, UK Defence Secretary John Healey revealed a major data breach involving nearly 19,000 Afghans who applied to relocate under British protection. The breach occurred in 2022, but was kept secret under a court order, lifted only today. Healy confirmed the secret resettlement route is now closed, though 600 pre-approved cases will proceed. He apologized to those affected and admitted the breach exposed many to Taliban reprisals. Afghans are relocating because they assisted British forces and now face Taliban threats. Around 4,500 have already arrived in the U.S., costing roughly $520 million. Let's have a look at what the UK Defence Secretary had to say.
In February 2022, 10 months after the then Defence Secretary Ben Wallace introduced the Afghan relocations and assistance policy, 6 months after the fall of Kabul, a defence official emailed an Arab caseworking file outside of authorised government systems. ARAP, as the House knows, is the resettlement scheme that this country established for Afghan citizens who worked for or with our UK armed forces over the combat years of Afghanistan.
Now we're joined by Keith Vaz. He's a former British minister joining us live from London. Thank you, Keith, for joining us today. Welcome to NewsX World. What are the established security protocols for handling such sensitive data related to Afghan relocation applicants, and how might those which have been compromised in this breach affect and now it's public affect image of image and confidence on British government?
Good morning. It's very clear that there has been a very, very serious breach. Of course, there are data breaches happening all over the world at any time, but it's usually the financial details of people that are released. In this particular case, it's very serious because the people who are on that list, 19,000 of them, are connected in some way to people from Afghanistan who have assisted British forces. And why they're at risk is that the Taliban, who the previous American administration handed the government of Afghanistan to, have said anyone who has collaborated with external forces will be regarded as a traitor. So it's not a simple data breach. This is a major breach that has now been revealed to the British Parliament and to the British public, which is going to mean that those people are going to have to be relocated to a safe country. Of course, they want to be relocated to Britain, and the cost of this has been put at about £1 billion. I can't see there's any other way in which you can keep these relatives safe other than to bring them to the UK. Now, in the past, I've dealt with a number of Afghanis who simply couldn't come to the UK, and that's why they joined this very special scheme, the Arab scheme. But then the government closed that scheme. Obviously, they're going to have to reopen it to let in these people whose names are now all over Afghanistan and who are actually at risk of death, because that's what the promise is if you collaborate with American or British forces.
And Keith, now what measures has the UK government taken since the breach was discovered, if we know any, since this news was publicized just today?
Well, there has been a court order that the previous government in Britain applied for, and that suppressed the fact that this had happened. So although obviously this information has been put around, somebody has got it, it's gone to an external government force, so these names are clear to somebody who we don't know. It's been kept a secret because of a court order, but the judge has lifted that court order and made it very clear that that information should be put in the public domain. Not the information of who these 19,000 people are, but just the fact that it was a mistake. The fact that it was suppressed for 2.5 years, and now a decision as to what's going to happen to all these people who are affected. I'm currently dealing with a lot of cases through my foundation of Afghanis who want to come and settle in the UK and have been told they can't. Well, this means all those cases are now opened up, and there is now a real prospect that we have to bring them to the UK. I have to say that the settlement scheme has worked. Afghanis are playing a part in British society. They have got jobs. They are wanting to get out of the centres that have been procured for them. So there's no evidence that they haven't worked well with the existing British authorities and the British people. They want to settle peacefully in the UK, and they should be allowed to do so.
Thank you very much, Keith Vaz, for joining us today and sharing your insight as a former British minister. Now we move on to our next news. The United Nations has warned that Israel's military campaign in the West Bank has triggered the largest Palestinian displacement since the Six-Day War in 1967. UNRWA spokesperson Juliet Touma said the ongoing Operation Iron Wall in northern West Bank has forced around 30,000 Palestinians from their homes this year alone. The UN Human Rights Office confirmed the figures, calling the scale of displacement unprecedented in recent history. The operation has drawn international concern as entire communities are being uprooted amid heavy military action. The UN is now calling for urgent humanitarian access and a halt to forced displacements. Let's listen in to the statements made at the United Nations.
The impact of the ongoing military operations by Israeli forces and the violence by Israeli settlers, they're forcing more people to be displaced. According to our UNRWA colleagues, this ongoing operation has been the longest since the 2000s during the Second Intifada. This is mainly in the northern West Bank. It is impacting several refugee camps in the area, and it is causing the largest population displacement of the Palestinians in the West Bank since 1967.
Permanently displacing the civilian population within occupied territory amounts to unlawful transfer, a grave breach of the Fourth Geneva Convention, and depending on the circumstances, may also amount to a crime against humanity.
Now we move on to our next news. A Brazilian prosecutor has urged the country's Supreme Court to convict former President Jair Bolsonaro of plotting a coup. The closing arguments come after a high-profile trial which even saw former U.S. President Donald Trump try to intervene on Bolsonaro's behalf. The far-right leader is accused of attempting to overturn the 2022 election results, which saw left-wing rival Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva return to power. Prosecutors argue Bolsonaro used his position to spread false claims of fraud and seek military backing to invalidate the vote. The trial has deepened political divisions in Brazil and could bar Bolsonaro from seeking office again. Now we move on to our next news. Gunman has killed 27 people in north-central Nigeria's Plateau State in the latest bout of violence in the Restive region. According to reports, the attack took place in the settlement of Jebu Rahos, located in the Riom local government area. As per reports, residents said that the attackers, armed with guns and machetes, launched the assault while people were asleep. While some residents blamed the attack on herdsmen, others pointed fingers at criminal gangs known as bandits. Plateau State, like other parts of Nigeria's Middle Belt region, has long suffered deadly farmer-herder clashes over land and natural resources, as well as violence meted out by gangs of armed criminals known as bandits. Reports state that local government council chairman Sati Bature Shuva confirmed the attack but did not provide any official death toll. Some residents reported that an unknown number of people were injured and sent to local hospitals for treatment. Now we move on to our next news. Equatorial Guinea has accused France of neo-colonial behavior at the United Nations. Top court in a bitter dispute over a luxury mansion in Paris. The property, worth over 100 million euros, was seized by French authorities after Vice President Théodore Obiang was convicted of corruption. Now, Equatorial Guinea is asking the International Court of Justice to block France from selling the estate. The country's ambassador told the court that Paris was meddling in African affairs and violating national sovereignty. The ICJ had earlier ruled the building could not be considered an embassy, undermining Guinea's legal protections. While the court's ruling will be legally binding, questions remain about how it would be enforced. Let's listen in to some of the arguments made at the hearing.
C'est que la France confisque les biens acquis sur son territoire au moyen de détournement de fonds publics des États tiers, de préférence africains, s'approprie en son tour les mêmes biens ou le produit de leur vente en refusant simplement toute restitution aux États victimes, lesquels se retrouvent ainsi 2 fois spoliés.
Con su proceder, Francia pone en riesgo el funcionamiento de una parte central de la Convención. Su propia legislación interna y autoridades parecen ignorar el derecho internacional. Reflejan el mismo enfoque inaceptable que ha caracterizado las actuaciones de Francia desde el inicio de esta controversia. Un enfoque que incluso podría describirse como paternalista e inclusive neocolonial.
Now we move on to our next news. A U.S. appeals court has temporarily blocked the Trump administration's decision to terminate temporary protected status, or TPS, for thousands of Afghans in the United States. The Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals granted an emergency stay on Monday after advocacy group CASA challenged the April order by the Department of Homeland Security to end TPS for Afghans and Cameroonians. The stay, which lasts until July 21st, gives the court more time to consider whether the move was lawful. CASA argued that ending protections would cause irreparable harm and called the decision arbitrary and discriminatory. The TPS program shields people from deportation and allows work permits for those fleeing war, natural disaster, or political upheaval. It had protected many Afghans evacuated after the 2021 Taliban takeover. Over 70,000 Afghans entered the U.S. on humanitarian parole after the fall of Kabul. Rights groups say sending them back could be life-threatening, especially for women under Taliban rule. Afghanevach, a leading coalition supporting evacuees, backed the legal challenge and urged the administration to reverse course and extend protections immediately. The DHS has until late Wednesday to respond. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring more news updates from around the world.